Welcome to the Day of Friday. My name is Michael Olschimke. I'm the CEO of Scalefree. We have the session here every Friday, 11 o'clock, essentially, Central European Standard Time, to run, to allow you, the audience, to ask questions, essentially, about data vault, data-driven technologies, data-driven applications, cloud computing, anything in this realm. You can ask all kinds of questions. You can use the chat here in the client if you want to ask a live question. You can use the Q&A in the client. Raise your hand if you want to get voice, or use the form I show you after today's session. And if you receive multiple questions, I'm going to cherry pick, essentially. It's time boxed, roughly 10 minutes for a good YouTube video. And if there will be no questions at all, I will talk about a cluster. We have enough questions at the moment, so all good. So we received one question. Let me just show it to you guys. The question is, for your timestamps in your data warehouse, what kind of what's the preferred time zone, essentially? And this question here is about the timestamps from the source system, but let me talk about both sets of timestamps. Let me start with the system-driven timestamps first, like the load date, the snapshot date, the last seen date, and if you have still one, the load end date. We don't have that typically anymore in nowadays projects, but all these technical time zones, these common attributes, essentially, we typically essentially define in UTC by default. Killer argument, or the major argument, is that most systems today are in the cloud. The cloud runs on UTC. That's the major argument. But it's also good to synchronize when you have components spread across the globe, that all of them have a synchronized essentially timestamp for a load date and so on. So all these technical timestamps are typically in UTC. This question here is really about the timestamps coming from a source system, and they might be in all kinds of time zones, right? So that's where your system operates. That's where your source application essentially is. Now, for those timestamps, what we do is typically we turn them also into UTC. However, we also keep the original timestamp. So my preference is to keep the original timestamp and turn it into a UTC value. And both of those values, the original timestamp as it comes from the source and the UTC value, both we store in the satellite, in the raw data vault. Where you do the conversation, I don't really care. Somewhere in staging, somewhere after staging, but before the raw data vault, essentially. That's the idea. You could also store the original time zone. So you could also get away with the UTC value and the original time zone, essentially, as a string. To store those two attributes, or all three. You don't need all three, in my opinion. You just need the local timestamp and the UTC, or the UTC value and the original time zone. My preference is the first two, because with the original timestamp, I can easily create a report in a local time zone of the data, and I can perform the JEDI test easily. So I can quickly test if I have captured all the data, if I haven't lost any data, if I can reproduce the original delivery one-to-one, essentially. The UTC timestamp is for global reporting, when the user tells me in the information requirement what's the time zone of the information to be used, right, for presentation purposes. And it might even be driven by the front end. So I might even don't know. So I just push the UTC value into reporting framework, and then it might get the final conversion. So for those global reports, I need the UTC value, because then I can quickly convert everything into the time zone. And UTC is also good for computations, because there's no summertime, wintertime. It's all just UTC value, and it's easy to compute in all kinds of different target time zones. So even if you don't care for global reporting, if you only report in a local time zone, I would still convert everything into UTC, keep both timestamps, but then work with the UTC timestamp and just define for my information requirements, everything is in my local time zone. So that's how we typically build the reports. It's much easier to work with these timestamps. Another issue is when we have customers where the source tables have, where they don't know what the time zone is. So they just dumped timestamps into these source files. I mean, the users. But you don't know for all these timestamps in which time zone it is. Well, well, in this case, what you do is essentially same game, follow the same game. For the raw data vault, we capture the data as is, right? It's raw data. So we capture it as it's being delivered from the source. I would still convert it into UTC, but then you need business logic to identify in what time zone was this timestamp. Maybe you know based on the user from which location they typically operate, think about vacation, or the location of the office, for example, that kind of stuff, how you convert these timestamps, this mess of timestamps from the raw data into useful timestamps. But that's all can become complicated business logic, essentially. So yeah, so we typically store everything in UTC, essentially. And how to store income timestamps from incoming sources that are in other time zones. Yeah, okay, so everything is converted. That answers the question, essentially. All right, cool. So, but good question. If you have a question like this, use the form here, sfr.ee/dbfriday. That form gets you essentially to, or there's a form behind this URL where you can type in a question like this, maybe upload some pictures from your whiteboard, from your team, whatever works. There's a risk I'm showing it, right? So yeah, have a nice pictures essentially. And then if you want to check out our other webinars, scalefree.to/webinars, where you find the WEScape and the DBT webinars once in a month. Also coming up is the Data Vault, or the Data Dreamland, too much in the game, Data Dreamland 2023 in Hanover, Germany on October 10 and 11. So it's also nice to shake hands if you want, if you come over, and also listen to some vendor talks and customer talks. So it's also a very interesting conference. All right, and the Data Vault Innovators, that's essentially a community-based forum, but also webinars, content essentially, where we also get more and more active. Will be also interesting if you come over there to take a look and sign up for the forum essentially. Cool. Yeah, thanks for joining today. That's it for me today. Enjoy your weekend. Hope to see you next Friday, guys. Thank you, guys. Thanks for joining today. If you'd like to discuss this further, give us a call on the number below here, and we're happy to discuss this with you. See you next time. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.